Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, July 17th, 2017. We're going to try a little bit of experimental radio today. Got a brand new experiment for you. You're going to love this one. Can you do internet radio while also replacing the carpet on your stairwells with hardwood flooring? That is the challenge that faces us today. Well, I don't know. I've got both hands free now that I've got the show started. I think it should be okay. As long as I don't use any of the sound effects, I should be able to manage both of these things properly. You'll probably hear a little bit of sound quality difference in the background today. That's just us hammering away and sawing pieces of hardwood because we forgot that we were doing this sort of thing. We knew that some renovation was going on, but really about how noisy it was, we forgot. But hey, that gives us some working class credibility today, right? Okay, that's great. Everyone knows. Maybe Chris Arnade will come by and interview us about how we feel about Donald Trump these days, and we'll be honest with him. There's nothing you can do to change our mind about what he does. Lots of things happened this weekend. I had a weekend more or less away from the news, which probably isn't a good combination with Greg Dworkin's travel plans. But maybe one of you can tell me what happened over the weekend. I think I caught wind of most of the craziness of it, the very dumbest parts of it. Of course, lots of developments over Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting. I think we can probably help straighten something about that one out. We're just speculating about exactly what happened there. But you would have heard, I'm sure, the story and the speculation followed after one of how many, like Donald Trump has about 15 different lawyers working on the Russia beat with him. Jay Sekulow, one of the worst and scummiest of the bunch, of course, himself a tax cheat and a thief, stealing money, over $60 million for his own family, out of a conservative Christian charity, because where else would you steal your money? Apparently making an appearance on television over the weekend during the Sunday shows, and making a comment that has been variously interpreted as either just entirely crazy and baseless and without any merit whatsoever, or possibly tipping the Trump hand on exactly who may have been present at that meeting. And apparently that was the subject of a lot of speculation over the weekend, too, as the roster expanded. We knew, of course, about the Russian lawyer with the name pronounced variously. I think we finally settled on, what was it, Veselnitskaya? Is that where we landed on that thing? I've already blanked out over the weekend. I tried to erase all memory of her. But then there was some speculation about the second person that we learned was in the meeting. We learned from the Rob Goldstone emails that there were supposed to be two people attending, and that he was going to later email the names, the identities of the two people. We never did see that email, which raises various questions about the transparency of the Donald Trump Jr. disclosure. You'll recall, of course, before we left for the weekend that before we even taped for a Friday for the weekend, he had dumped what he claimed was the entire email chain about that meeting. And of course, it can't possibly be the entire email chain, because somewhere along the line, Rob Goldstone must have emailed somebody about who was attending the meeting. But I guess, I don't know, do we still not have that email? I guess, that's still missing, and you know that has to be out there somewhere. This could, I guess Donald Trump Jr. could kind of cling to having been transparent with his own emails. It may have been the case that Rob Goldstone emailed the identities of those people expected to show up at the meeting to someone else, perhaps Rona Graff or anybody else that might have been working in Trump Tower at the time. The likelihood of someone getting into Trump Tower past both the Secret Service and Trump Tower security without so much as a name on a list somewhere seems far-fetched at best. And that led to the Jay Sekulow story, I guess. Let me grab Think Progress's report about this one, because it poses the next level of speculation. Did Donald Trump's lawyer accidentally make a huge confession about the meeting with the Russian lawyer? That's a good question, and we'll look into it and see what we can figure out about it. But here's my take on it. Well, let me give you, I guess we'll start with the Think Progress take. Josh Israel, I think, sums it up nicely for them. Jay Sekulow suggested the Secret Service vetted the meeting, but Donald Trump Jr. was not being protected at that time. I had mentioned just a moment ago that it seems far-fetched that the Secret Service wouldn't have gotten the name of the lawyer and the other person supposedly attending this meeting. And the reason I think that they may have gotten it is not that Donald Trump Jr. was being protected at that time. I doubt very much that he was, and the Secret Service denies that he was, and I'll take their word for it for sure. Donald Trump Sr., though, had been under Secret Service protection, as we mentioned, middle of last week, before this really became an issue, for something like 6 months at that point. And, of course, the Trump Tower, where he was holed up most of the time when he wasn't out doing rallies, was likewise under Secret Service protection. That is why I think they must have gotten a hold of those names, or why those names would have to have been cleared, just in terms of we're expecting this person to show up with the Secret Service. I don't think that they care very much who's meeting. I don't think they care who's meeting with any of the people, whether they're protecting them or not. That's one of the red herrings in all of this. But as long as Donald Trump Sr. was under protection, the building would likewise have been under protection. And although they wouldn't stop everyone who's coming and going, certainly anybody who was arriving with an appointment and who sought access to one of the Trump's floors, one of the floors on which they might expect Donald Trump himself to show up, would have to clear through both, I would think, Trump Tower security and most likely Secret Service security as well. So Josh Israel summarizes this line of thought pretty well. Jay Sekulow, one of the president's attorneys, suggested on Sunday that the June 2016 meeting between multiple Russians, we're now up to, that's another storyline, and Trump's son-in-law and campaign manager was vetted by the United States Secret Service. Here's how he gets around to it. Although he claimed that the president did not know about or participate in the meeting, which was attended by Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort, Sekulow suggested on ABC this week that it could not have really been all that bad, or else the agents would have stopped it. He said, I wondered why the Secret Service, if this was nefarious. Why did the Secret Service allow these people in? Sekulow told ABC's Jonathan Karl. The president had Secret Service protection at that point. That raised a question with me. Well, that raised a question with everybody else, too, I think. In November 2015, then Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson approved Secret Service protection for then-candidate Donald Trump and Ben Carson as well. The agency protects major presidential and vice presidential candidates and their spouses, as well as the president, vice president, immediate family, visiting foreign heads of state and their spouses. As such, Trump and his wife Melania were being protected at the time of the meeting. But at that point, the Secret Service was not protecting any of the Trump campaign representatives who actually attended. Only in September of 2016, well after the Russian visit, did agents begin providing protection for Ivanka Trump. Prior to that, Trump's adult children were only provided with protection when physically near the candidate, according to a contemporaneous ABC News report. Separate protection for Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. came sometime after that. Although the Secret Service is authorized to make arrests without warrant for any offense against the United States committed in their presence, the Secret Service's protection detail is to provide for the physical safety of protectees. It's unclear why Sekulow would think their job would include stopping them from nefarious activities or ensuring the candidate or his team did not violate campaign finance laws. That's the basics of it. There's a little bit more here. Let's see. Unless the Secret Service thought that the senior Trump or Vladimir Putin himself was going to try to be at or very near the meeting, Sekulow's claim that the Secret Service allowed the Russian in is what raises the real questions. There's some update here. In a statement to Reuters on Sunday, and we have that available if we want to parse that, a Secret Service spokesman confirmed that Donald Jr. was not under the agency's protection when the meeting took place, so we know that much. Here's the thing. I would suggest this to you. Jay Sekulow knows next to nothing about what happened at that meeting. I doubt very much that anybody has brought him up to speed. I doubt very much whether he wants to be brought up to speed. I don't think he wants to know. But he wanted to escape from that interview without looking like an uninformed moron, and certainly without conceding anything that would hurt his client. So a lot of people were a little bit surprised to see that he said, well, if the Secret Service, if there was anything nefarious going on, the Secret Service would have stopped it. And a lot of people took that to mean, oh, did he just accidentally tip his hand? Did he just accidentally let us know that Donald Trump Sr. was at that meeting? Isn't that why the Secret Service would have been concerned with this meeting? If he were going to be there, then they would have been worried about nefarious purposes from Russian agents anyway, if they had been able to identify them as Russian agents at the time. And here's what I think. I think that, again, Sekulow has no idea what was going on there. No one has told him. He hasn't asked anyone. He doesn't want to know. He just gave the answer that he thought would possibly give cautious critics of Donald Trump pause. They would stop and say, maybe this means something. Or, yeah, why would the Secret Service do things this way? Well, the Secret Service doesn't do things that way. They wouldn't be vetting the meeting if Donald Trump were in there or not. They would only be worried if somebody showed up with a weapon and Donald Trump was going to be there. That would concern them, certainly. But they don't vet the propriety of meetings that the president or any advisors to the president are taking. Even if he were president at the time and having that meeting in the White House, if the president insists, either directly or through his top aides, that someone is to be brought to the White House and is going to have a meeting with the president, even if the Secret Service doubts the integrity of that person, unless they're bringing a weapon or they have reason to believe they would bring a weapon or otherwise physically attack the president, there's not much that the Secret Service is going to do to try and prevent the meeting from taking place. Unless there's physical violence in the offing, they're not terribly interested. They'll take note of who comes in and who comes out. They may even be able or willing to testify about the feelings that they had about the people after the fact, but they're not going to vet the quality of the people meeting with the president. That's not up to them. So it doesn't really matter a great deal. I don't think Sekulow knows anything about that. He just wanted to say something that would make people stop and think either nothing nefarious was going on, because obviously the Secret Service would have stopped it because people don't understand what the mission of the Secret Service really is. Or perhaps, I don't know, I guess it's possible that he just thought he was sowing yet more chaos in this thing. And we hadn't. Indeed, there are people chasing their tails this morning, trying to parse out whether or not this meant that Sekulow accidentally had let slip that Donald Trump himself had been in the meeting. He may well have been in the meeting. He may have gone. He may not have gone. He may not have been in the building. I don't know. The Secret Service would have handled things the same way. They were never going to vet the people who were arriving, unless the people who were arriving were on their list as people who had made overt threats to the safety of Donald Trump or anyone they were protecting in the past, and they were able to come up with that name. I don't know if that's always going to be the case. All right. Well, anyway, so if you're spending time on that one, I mean, why not double check? I can't tell you not to, but my thinking is that Jay Sekulow knows nothing about the meeting and didn't bother to ask either. He just wanted, his job was to go and occupy the time of whoever was running that Sunday show that he was on, and try and redirect them from anything damaging to his client and deny anything. Basically, I mean, if you're wondering about how someone like Jay Sekulow prepares for an appearance on the Sunday shows on behalf of Donald Trump, I would think it's probably, you'd think it might be nerve-wracking, but that's because you're the kind of person that likes to tell the truth and stay accountable for what they say. Remember also, as foolish as it would ordinarily be for a lawyer representing a client to show up on television and say, well, either one, that the Secret Service had vetted these guys, or that if there was anything nefarious going on, the Secret Service wouldn't let them through, or so-and-so was or wasn't under Secret Service protection. All of the facts involved, why bother researching it, honestly? All he's there to do is give the answer that will allow them to escape the interview with the least amount of damage. And if you think that's not particularly lawyerly of him, that is also true. But remember again, that's not where Jay Sekulo's bread is buttered. He is a lawyer. He gets paid for his legal services, no doubt, or, well, for legally representing some people. But I don't know how much of a service he provides. And he's got $60 million tucked away that he stole from charity anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Even if he's fired as Donald Trump's lawyer, he'll be doing fine. Donald Trump, though, didn't hire him to handle the pleadings in court. He handled him to be a willing spokesperson who would be willing to go on and just spew. He's probably not saying, look, go on there and lie for me, but he needed somebody who was famously capable of going on television and just saying whatever needs to be said to survive to the next day. And does it matter if you get me in more trouble? Does it matter if you lie and say something that isn't true, send people on a wild goose chase and they get mad and they hold me accountable for it? No, I don't care. Chaos is my game. And if you say something that's completely crazy that actually gets me in more trouble, we'll just deny that it's true. Well, first we'll probably deny that you said it. Second of all, if we get caught and they play the tape back to us, we'll just deny that they understood what it meant, and that we'll claim that all the words meant something different. And then third, we'll just say, well, this is all just fake news anyway. We could even, if you want, I mean, if we're really particularly interested in preserving the public character of Jay Sekulo, you could, I suppose we could always pull out the trick we've been saving for later to this point, which was, you fabricated that tape. I never said those things, and that was computer-generated animation of Jay Sekulo, and you made the whole thing up. I'm waiting for that one to happen. I did see another prediction come to fruition over the weekend, though. Oh, let's see if I can pull that one up. I'm pretty sure I didn't put it away in pocket, but it's a pretty recent tweet of mine, just picking up on the fact that this prediction had come true. I don't have to scroll too far back, I don't think, if I can find this thing. But I noticed that over the weekend, somebody's prediction over how Donald Trump would try to distract from the emerging truth came true. Here we are. This came, it's 6 days ago now. It was 5 days ago when I noticed that this was being done. But Jody Avirgan, I don't know if I have the pronunciation correct, but Jody, a podcaster for 538, according to his Twitter bio here, made a morning Trump tweet prediction. This would have been on July 10th that he predicted that this was. Of course, I guess he was predicting it for either July 10th or possibly for July 11th, so it was a couple days late. Morning Trump tweet prediction. If Hillary got the questions to a debate, Jody predicted Trump would tweet, if Hillary got the questions to a debate, what's so bad with my son meeting with someone who had dirt on her? In other words, it's okay, Donald Trump Jr., he's a good kid. He was taking the meeting, as Republicans continued to insist everyone would. And what's so bad about that, since Hillary got the questions to the debate ahead of time, which is arguably, I don't know, is it even, I've lost track of what the truth is on that one. Is it arguably untrue, or did she actually get something? I can't even recall what she got. I reflexively deny the fact that happened. Anyway, and I may even be right about that one, but that's one I've left behind a long time ago because it's just substantively not important as compared with, say, I don't know, treason, or treason care, for that matter. But Jody got it right. It was a couple of days early, but eventually Donald Trump did get around to tweeting just that, and on Sunday, Jody was ready to take credit for it, too. As he pointed out, told you that this was going to happen. He retweeted his own tweet and then did so alongside the actual Donald Trump tweet, which came on yesterday, on Sunday morning, early in the morning, 6:35 a.m. Hillary Clinton can illegally get the questions to the debate and delete 33,000 emails, but my son Don is being scorned by the fake news media. Yes, your son Don would be being scorned by the fake news media regardless of whether he took this meeting or not. He's a dirtbag and people hate him justifiably. You're a scumbag yourself and probably shouldn't be surprised by all that. But I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Hillary Clinton can illegally get the questions to a debate. Nothing illegal about that, obviously. And delete 33,000 emails. Also, we've gotten to the bottom of this one already. Nothing illegal about that either. Suspicious? To you? Sure. Something you want to make up about illegality about that? Well, I guess no one can stop you. It's just also not true. But more to the point, it was pretty funny that it was nailed so early. Everybody knew that this would come through when he made the prediction. I felt like, boy, he hit the nail on the head with that one. That is coming today. We were both wrong. It didn't come until Sunday. But I think Trump had to fly back and forth to Paris beforehand. And so he was distracted. And then Sunday morning, there was golf in the offing, and he was up early, and his creative juices were flowing. Anyway, congratulations to Jody on nailing that one. Let's see. Yes, one of the other stories over the weekend that emerged from, there's probably two or three more, that emerged from this stupid meeting story. One is that I think they're up to now 8 people having been in the meeting, and I'm unclear on whether those were 8 Russians or just 8 total. Did the Trump side bring 3 people and the Russians bring 5? And I don't know whether they've figured out who everyone is, but I think they've also settled on the fact that one of the other Russians to show up is a guy who he's now an American citizen, which is pretty interesting. Just a fun twist on all this stuff because, of course, on Friday's taped show, we were talking about the fact that Republicans were insisting that anybody would have taken this meeting in that if you were running a campaign and someone called you and said they have information that's damaging to your opponent, obviously. I mean, people do opposition research all the time. So why wouldn't you take such a meeting? And the answer is, well, people who call you with information like that, generally speaking, it's a red herring, of course, to be saying anybody would take this meeting because for the most part, no one's getting calls from Russians about this sort of thing. People are getting calls from other Americans, and it's not nearly the same sort of issue. If Americans are calling you and offering you things of value, than if Russians are calling you and offering you things of value. Anyway, there's a note from Michael Musson who says, don't forget the last response. It was illegal even though it didn't happen. Yeah, okay, right, of course. Why not? We'll throw that one in there as well. Okay. Well, let's see. As you know, and as Bill reminded us in his morning tweet from all the way from Portland, Maine, Donald Trump is innocent of everything, despite the fact that he's lawyered up 5 ways to Sunday. The party of personal responsibility couldn't possibly illustrate it any better. All right. Well, let's see. Oh, thank you, Albert Titus, for the observation, also noting that Ann Coulter was supposed to be at the Russian meeting, but someone else took her seat. That was another great weekend story. Apparently she had a big blow up with Delta Airlines. Good observation by many people wondering why she was not physically dragged off the flight, as almost anyone else would have been if they had been making such a scene on an airliner. Hard to understand, but not really. We know that special treatment is afforded to celebrities all the time. Okay, so let's see if we can't catch up on one or two of those other stray stories. Here is, I saw initial early reports as well as early speculation, including speculation from our own Scout Finch, who was speculating on the air, not on the air, but on Twitter on Friday. Yeah, I think it was Friday. Even as I was taping the show for Friday, that the second person who still hadn't at that point been named, who was in the meeting with Veselnitskaya, was as I mentioned, he's now an American citizen, but that he was a former Soviet counterintelligence operative, and a person who had been spotted when we, I think we noted during either Thursday or Friday's show, that when Veselnitskaya had showed up at the hearing at, I can't recall now offhand which committee it was, but there was YouTube video circulating of the Obama administration's ambassador to Russia testifying at this hearing, and that the issue of the Magnitsky Act had come up, and she, of course, was on the case of lobbying against the Magnitsky Act and for repealing it on behalf of the Russian government, that she brought this person with her to the hearing, and that was where his name first came up, and we mentioned it, I believe, last week, Rinat Akhmetshin, which, the more I puzzle over it, I'm not sure what his ethnicity is, but Akhmetshin, I'm wondering whether there's some, I mean, probably not currently Muslim, but I wonder whether there's Muslim background just in the distant past, and that the surname, I was just curious about whether the Akhmet part of Akhmetshin had anything to do with, Ahmed, sort of a remnant of perhaps early Muslim invasion and settlement of various of what later became Russian territories or Russian satellite countries. And, there are areas, of course, of the former Soviet Union where there's a substantial Muslim population, or certainly once was a substantial Muslim population. Just curious. It doesn't make any difference one way or the other in terms of what he was doing, but it would just be an interesting twist on things, given the weird connection between alt-right white supremacist types here in the United States and their worship of Russians as some sort of white European savior race. And, okay. I think you can all see the irony in all of that. Anyway, his name comes up in a couple of reports about that hearing, but it is in fact a Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty report from almost contemporaneous, really, July 17th, 2016. The writer of this particular article, Mike Eckel, just by way of giving credit for it, Russian gun for hire lurks in shadows of Washington's lobbying world. And we get a little bit of mention of Akhmetshin and what he's all about. So now that he's been spotted in the hearing room alongside Veselnitskaya, and we have this mystery translator person supposedly showing up alongside her, there was some speculation that this might have been the guy. And a little bit of pushback on the speculation at the time was, well, no, it's a translator, and so I'm sure it's not this guy. I don't know why anybody would be sure it's not him. He could very easily be posing as a translator. I'm not 100% positive, despite the fact that Veselnitskaya has given interviews to American television outlets only in Russian, that she actually doesn't speak English. It might just be great cover for her to continue to pretend that she doesn't, and so she can duck questions or blame it on bad translations or whatever. I do have some questions about why she would show up to a Capitol Hill hearing with no English skills whatsoever. What could she possibly be listening to for all of that time that she sits there? But anyway, we'll see whether that comes out later on and whether that speculation is proven prescient. So, Russian gun for hire lurks in the shadows of Washington's lobbying world, and it's not Veselnitskaya, it's Akhmetshin that they're talking about. Let's take a quick look at this piece. The hoots and jeers began the minute the movie ended and the lights went up on the 7th floor of the museum, a Washington museum dedicated to the free press. The film was a semi-fictionalized look at the story of Sergei Magnitsky, the Russian lawyer who helped to uncover the massive tax fraud and later died in a Moscow jail. And we've heard about the circumstances in which he's died in the past. In the front of the room, a handful of Russian opposition activists shouted shame at the director. In the back, out of the spotlight, was the event's organizer, a fast-talking, nattily-dressed man in a dark blue, double-breasted suit, standing at a small table, sipping bottled water and quietly watching the commotion. The June 13th showing, remember the timing again here, June 13th, 2016, just a couple of days after the Trump Tower meeting. The June 13th showing was the film's premiere. Other screenings had been canceled in Europe following protests by critics who say it is a crude attempt to smear Magnitsky's name and that that of the Western financier who employed him, William Browder. That name keeps coming up over and over. That it was shown at all was a small coup for Rinat Akhmetshin, the man at the back of the room who for nearly 20 years has worked the shadowy corners of the Washington lobbying scene on behalf of businessmen and politicians from around the former Soviet Union. Oh, the hammer is getting a little louder. I'm sorry. I have to continue building these steps here during the show, but I'm trying to multitask. I'm sure you don't mind. Anyway, I call him skilled. Akhmetshin though I am certain they exist, I know of no Russian gun for hire who managed to run his campaign so successfully, running circles around purportedly much more seasoned Washington hands, says Steve Levine, a veteran Washington reporter who explored some of Akhmetshin's past work in his 2007 book, The Oil and the Glory. Who knew that there was a book about this guy already? Barely registering in U.S. lobbying records, which is exactly how a counterintelligence agent from the old Soviet Union might want it, the 48-year-old Akhmetshin has been tied to efforts to bolster opponents of Kazakhstan's ruling regime, discrediting a fugitive former member of Russia's parliament, and undermine a Russian-owned mining firm involved in a $1 billion lawsuit with company information allegedly stolen by hackers. What? Stolen by hackers? Huh. I hope that doesn't mean anything in particular. Anyway, but that's probably one of the more important points of the whole thing here. He's got connections to hackers. Weird. But his most recent campaign has a qualitatively new dimension, thrusting him to the center of an issue that helped send U.S.-Russia relations to lows unseen since the Cold War. Interesting. Once again, contemporaneous with the meetings with Donald Trump Jr. in Trump Tower offices, this observation of U.S.-Russia relations being at a low unseen since the Cold War. Magnitsky's death in 2009, the alleged persecution by Russian officials he blew the whistle on, and the eponymous U.S. law that punished alleged Russian rights abusers and infuriated the Kremlin. You undermine Browder, you undermine Magnitsky. You undermine Magnitsky, you undermine the sanctions. The sanctions come back to the center on this one, says one U.S. government official who has followed the Magnitsky saga closely but wasn't authorized to speak publicly on it. Then you undermine the entire sanctions regime. Again, July 2016, and we're already very clearly focused on undermining the sanctions regime. I don't think most mainstream reporting on relations with Russia and American relations, or rather the relationship of the major party candidates with Russia, centered on the sanctions until a little bit later. But obviously there were some early hints about it. A bespectacled 48-year-old who holds dual Russian-American citizenship and is known to ride around downtown Washington on a retro orange bicycle. Interesting. Akhmetshin has managed to fly largely under the radar in past campaigns. There are only a handful of records in the congressional lobbying database bearing his imprint. But a small paper trail in U.S. court records offers an illustrative sampling of his work. In 1998, he founded the Washington office of an organization called the International Eurasian Institute for Economic and Political Research. Another long-ass name. He has a penchant for that, I guess. To help expand democracy and the rule of law in Eurasia, as if he were really interested in that. His earliest clients included members of Kazakhstan's opposition who were angling against the longtime rule of President Nursultan Nazarbayev and his ruling elite. Years later, he ended up in a public relations effort to undermine a former Nazarbayev son-in-law before he fell out with the regime and fled the country. In 2011, Akhmetshin was accused of helping to organize a smear campaign against former Russian Duma deputy Ashot Agazarian. Maybe we'll leave it at that. Egiaz. Agazarian. No good at pronouncing those things. Anyway, let's see. So he's discrediting this Ashot Agazarian, who had sought political asylum in the United States in the face of criminal charges in Russia related to a business dispute. And that's really interesting. That's at the root of a lot of these disputes, and it's becoming likely that a lot of the Magnitsky issues and the things that Veselnitskaya and Akhmetshin were working on may also have actually originated in business disputes. These oligarchs, when they get in fights with one another, because of the structure of the thugocracy, oligarchic thugocracy that they've built in Russia, with all the oligarchs, one having made their fortunes in these gray areas in between what law there is in the Russian Federation and their connections to the government and their ability to redefine the law as they go along. A lot of times when they get in one another's way, they're able to level legal charges against one another or rearrange the law as necessary so that they can engineer legal charges against one another. And, witness what happened to Magnitsky here. If you can manage to get someone on the wrong side of the law and get them into custody, there's a pretty good chance you can just murder them in jail and win your business dispute that way. That kind of has to be kept in mind. Putin and his oligarchs are a pretty awful bunch of bloody murderers, and they do these things. And we know that this is the case, but it serves as a good reminder every once in a while when you say, how does this arise as a business dispute and end up as a political issue and then end up as a murder? Somehow we figure that, a political issue has ended in murder. That we can understand from a brutal dictatorship. How about a business relationship? Why would that end in murder? I mean, it's not that the motivation doesn't exist or we don't understand it when it's explained to us. We just think it's outrageous. But if you tie your business fortunes, because they're mostly built on cheating, using the leverage of the government, if you tie that to every time to using the leverage of the power of the state that you can leverage because you control the government, I guess it becomes a lot easier to understand. Anyway, I'll rejoin the Radio Free Europe description of what's going on here. So Akhmetshin in 2011 organizes this smear campaign against the Russian Duma deputy who has gotten into one such business dispute and fled to the United States rather than, say, face charges and find himself jailed and murdered. He takes off. A lawsuit filed in U.S. federal court in Manhattan charged that the campaign against him sought to persuade U.S. officials to revoke his asylum status and force him to return to Russia. He had slipped out of their hands. They could no longer imprison him long enough to murder him because he was granted asylum in the United States. But you can leverage the Russian government as a thug oligarch and get them to make official inquiries with the United States and dispute someone's status as an asylum seeker. And if that happens, they'll be sent right back to your hands where you can conveniently murder them in your own prisons. Anyway, so they tried to persuade U.S. officials to revoke his asylum status and force him back to Russia, where he was involved in a heated dispute with a billionaire businessman over a Moscow hotel project. Who do we know that might be interested in Moscow hotel projects? Ahmadchyan was not the target of the defamation lawsuit, but in court filings, lawyers allege he was enlisted along with other Washington public relations companies and private investigators to help publish articles in a Jewish newspaper accusing the deputy of anti-Semitism. That'll help undermine your case when it comes to deciding on your asylum status. That's a pretty easy way of doing things. He also fought to keep his emails and computer files from being released to opposing lawyers. I guess he got hacked. Isn't that a surprise? Some of my clients, Ahmadchyan says, some of my clients are national governments or high-ranking officials in those governments. He said this in an affidavit in August 2012. My government clients have highly sensitive discussions in my emails concerning the location or relocation of American military bases in areas within the former Soviet Union. Oh, so it's Ahmadchyan, in fact, fighting to keep his emails and computer files from being released to opposing lawyers. Interesting. More recently, Ahmadchyan was caught up in a particularly nasty $1 billion legal fight concerning a potash mining operation in central Russia. Interesting. Lots of mining interests there. Of course, that's how oligarchs came to be oligarchs in the post-Soviet era. They bought up state-owned enterprises at rock-bottom prices and then were enjoyed monopolist control of those industries and took all the profit from them when they were privatized. Well, a Dutch court was the main venue. The dispute spilled into U.S. courts when lawyers for one of the companies accused their counterparts of organizing a scheme to hack their computers and other communications. So early on here in, let's see, this is a case dating to August of 2012, oligarchs hacking other oligarchs, essentially. The mining operations hacking their competition, presumably in order to maintain their monopolistic or near monopolistic control over the profits that's the kind of operation that keeps oligarchs. Anyway, so no wonder they resorted to one of their favorite dark arts on this. The man who masterminded the scheme of the potash mining operation against its rivals, the man who masterminded the scheme was Ahmadchyan, according to a suit filed in November in New York State Court that also accused him of being a former Soviet military intelligence officer who developed a special expertise in running negative public relations campaigns. In a related filing in federal district court in Washington, where lawyers sought to force him to turn over records and emails, Ahmadchyan confirmed he was helping in an advisory capacity, but denied the hacking allegations. So in other words, what we're looking at here is a July 2016 report before the guy's name becomes a big deal, before it's connected with the Donald Trump Jr. meeting. But contemporaneous with the meeting itself, a picture emerges in this reporting of Ahmadchyan as a dirty trickster who has a particular penchant for employing hackers on behalf of himself and his clients to try and find information that would undermine the opposition. And that in federal court filings, his opponents are identifying him way back in 2012 as a former Soviet intelligence officer. What do you know? He also revealed his compensation rates, I guess, in this dispute. He said he was paid $45,000 up front. In a later declaration, he stated his normal billing rate was $450 an hour. In an email response to RFE, that is Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, Ahmadchyan denied that he ever worked for Soviet military intelligence, something he would have had to declare when he applied for U.S. citizenship. Of course, that doesn't mean it's true. It just means that he didn't declare it. I am an American citizen since 2009, which does put an interesting twist on things, who pays taxes, earned his citizenship after living here since 1994, and swore an oath of loyalty to the United States of America, he wrote. I have my questions about that, but I'm sure he said the words. Congressional lobbying records list other clients for Ahmadchyan. For example, the Azeri Democracy Initiative Foundation, registered in 2006 and 2007. the newest client, called the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation. Does anybody remember that really long, stupid-sounding name, the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation? That's his newest client. That, of course, is Natalia Veselnitskaya's organization that she formed to perform her anti-Magnitsky lobbying duties. This is his newest client, this being reported again in early to mid-July of last year. This group was incorporated in Delaware. How did they find out that they should be incorporating in Delaware? Someone must be directing their efforts. In February, they registered in Delaware and registered in lobbying records on April 3rd of last year, but the initial entry was signed by Akhmetshin only 2 months later, on June 11th, something that experts in lobbying law and disclosures describe as unusual. Its address, the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation, its address is a shared co-working space on the 5th floor of a downtown Washington office building, just a few floors down from Baker Hostetler, a major U.S. law firm that represented the defendant in the Agaya Zarayan lawsuit. Remember this, the Russian Duma member who got in the business dispute. I'll never likely get that name correct unless someone's actually trying to tweet me a pronunciation guide, and I haven't been able to pick up on it yet. Okay, let's see. So basically, we're talking about one of those post office box operations. Sometimes they come with some meeting rooms these days. You can rent co-working space, so that in addition to being able to receive mail at a post office box, that you can designate a suite. You know, if you're post office box 250, you can give a fancy Washington street address and suite 250, but it's really just a mailbox. But if you actually need to meet with people, there are occasionally, you can make use of meeting rooms in this space without actually having to rent a full-on office. Anyway, Baker Hostetler, the firm that they are a few floors down from in this office building, is also the lead firm defending an offshore company called Prevezon that U.S. prosecutors have alleged received some of the $230 million in errant funds that Magnitsky uncovered. Prosecutors are, of course, at the time they were still trying to seize millions of dollars in assets in the United States and elsewhere, a case that is currently on appeal on a technical question. But, of course, we know that case is now over with. By the way, full disclosure from Armando, who says that he has used those mail office rental services in Miami from time to time. It's not that they're illegitimate on their face, but it's always important, I think, to get a real feel for who's trying to use it to pretend that they have a business presence in some place that they really don't, as opposed to, well, I do work representing clients in Miami and I don't maintain an office there full time, and you and I need to have a meeting, so I've rented this office space for us to sit down in a working environment, a professional environment, and have that meeting. You could always have it in Starbucks, but if you want someplace quiet and you want a phone and fax machine, copy machine available to you, etc., fax machine, in case you wanted to pretend it was 1992 for whatever reason, computer services and word processing, etc., all available. Bathrooms also helpful. So it's not that there's no legitimate use for them. It's just also a very convenient way to put up a front very quickly, too, if that's what you need to do. Anyway, so back to Baker Hostetler. Baker Hostetler, the lead firm defending the offshore company Prevezon that U.S. prosecutors were pursuing at the time, and, of course, which has been settled since then, and under less than ideal and somewhat suspicious circumstances as well, because of course it was Preet Bharara who was prosecuting the case as U.S. attorney, who later was fired from the job, and the U.S. Attorney's Office very quickly thereafter settled, fired of course by Donald Trump's administration, and the U.S. Attorney's Office very quickly settled with Prevezon thereafter. So, where were we? Records list Akhmetshin as the lead lobbyist for the foundation, along with another man named, and here's our next entry in the list here, Robert Arakalian, who could not be located for comment. Wasn't available for comment, didn't return our calls for comment, could not be located for comment. The disclosure form indicates no sources of foreign funding for the foundation. Nor does it indicate the issues the foundation intends to lobby on. It's also unusual. In fact, the only indication of its purpose comes from a related, largely unfinished website that states its main goal is to help restart American adoption of Russian children. That's the cover story for the anti-sanctions lobbying. Again, the much more friendly goal and reason for being than the lifting of sanctions against human rights abusers and the people who murdered Sergei Magnitsky. That is a reference, of course, the Russian adoption issue, to the adoption ban that the Kremlin pushed immediately following the adoption of, no pun intended, the enactment of the Magnitsky Act in 2012. Akhmetshin has paid at least one visit to Congress in connection with new human rights legislation that builds on the earlier Magnitsky Act, along with Ron Dellums. A little bit of a disappointment there, former U.S. congressman from California and now longtime Washington lobbyist, a Democrat from back in the day. Akhmetshin visited House member offices on May 17th of last year to meet with, okay, now you have one guess, one member of Congress. Just one person with whom these Russians and their now on their ridiculous mission to lift sanctions against human rights abusers and the murderers of Sergei Magnitsky. They pick one congressman out. Does it occur to you right away that it's Dana Rohrabacher? Because it should. Remember that Kevin McCarthy thought that only two people were getting paid by Putin, Donald Trump and Dana Rohrabacher. And here's Dana showing up in this story once again. May 17th, Akhmetshin meets with Dana Rohrabacher, another California congressman, viewed as one of the most sympathetic U.S. officials to Russian causes. According to the Daily Beast, an article linked herein, interesting title of this article, Putin's Dirty Game in the U.S. Congress. Let's just open that up for later examination. Let's see if there's any auto-playing video that's going to start on us in the background. No, I don't think so. Okay, but this goes back to May of last year. Michael Weiss, the writer on that one, and we know he's been following this storyline for a long time. Could be very interesting. Maybe we should mine that. According to the Daily Beast, the two told congressional officials, I guess Dellums and Akhmetshin, that they were lobbying on behalf of Prevazon. But Dellums told Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty that his involvement focused on resuming Russian adoptions by U.S. parents. Okay. He had bought fully into the cover story. And it may, of course, have been the case that that's exactly why he was told he was being retained. And that's not just because he was a former Democratic congressman. They could absolutely be keeping their American counterparts in the dark about what they're all about. Although it would be pretty difficult to believe that someone like Ron Dellums couldn't have figured out that there was this very clear connection between the adoption issue and the sanctions. That the adoption issue only existed because the Russians were bitter about the sanctions. There would be no other reason for doing this. Anyway, he goes on to say, I don't know anything about the other stuff, Prevazon or anything else, Dellums said. Moscow, meanwhile, has made no secret of its desire to undermine the Magnitsky Act and has waged open war against Browder as part of that effort. Browder has been barred entry in Russia even before, barred entry into Russia even before Magnitsky's death. And in 2013, he was convicted in absentia by a Russian court for tax evasion. I have wondered what is their beef with Browder. We do need to dig further into the background of that one to figure it out entirely, but that's where it stands. Convicted in absentia in a Russian court for tax evasion. Magnitsky was posthumously convicted on similar charges. A Council of Europe investigation concluded the conditions leading up to the death amounted to torture. State-run Russian TV has aired investigations about Browder, and the country's top prosecutor, remember, that's somebody who is likewise linked to Veselnitskaya from our Friday show. The country's top prosecutor has linked Browder to an investigative documentary exploring the shady business practices of the prosecutor's sons. And I have no doubt that everybody is somewhat shady in this, possibly including Browder himself. But the most potent weapon to date may be the film that premiered at the Museum by Russian-born filmmaker Andrei Nekrasov, whose previous films were critical of the Kremlin. But they've gotten him to switch sides, I guess, on this one. In the film called The Magnitsky Act, behind the scenes, Nekrasov uses actors to reenact Magnitsky's arrest and death in a notorious prison. He then professes to find discrepancies in the narrative, ultimately suggesting that, in fact, it was Browder who masterminded the original tax fraud, and that Browder lied about the circumstances surrounding Magnitsky's death. Whew, fake news, huh? I guess that's what he's trying to allege. Browder, who's American-born but now lives in Britain, has aggressively fought to keep the film from being shown anywhere. A Norwegian film festival pulled the film after legal threats from Browder. A screening in April at the European Parliament was cancelled after protests from Magnitsky relatives and a German lawmaker. Browder, who had appealed to the museum not to show the film, charged that the screening was part of an intense lobbying campaign to remove Magnitsky's name from the new legislation before Congress. The Putin regime has embarked on a very ambitious and well-resourced international campaign to discredit me and Sergei Magnitsky in order to try to repeal the Magnitsky Act, Browder told Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, sorry. They refer to themselves as RFE/RL. I'm filling in the blanks for you. They work through their embassies, law enforcement agencies, as well as through private individuals with strong government connections. These Russians do. Strong government connections, like Akhmetshin and Veselnitskaya, I guess. A spokesman for the Russian embassy in Washington called Browder's allegations precarious and unfounded. I don't think precarious would have been the word I would have chosen, but their English is a little different than ours. The June 13th screening of the film featured an open bar reception beforehand, that's always fun, and in a notable choice for such a controversial event, traditional movie snacks, popcorn, chocolate-covered caramels, and bottled water. This is how Americans watch films. We must do this. Invitees to the screening received notice via email that included a disclaimer suggestive of a lobbying effort. It said, "This event complies with the congressional gift rules so that members and staff of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives may attend." A handful of congressional staffers did attend, along with at least one State Department official. Who exactly is funding the film's production, promotion, or the ongoing lobbying effort isn't entirely clear. How surprising. Nekrasov has said the film is financed through grants from arts and film councils in Norway, where he is partnered with a production company. Nekrasov told RFE/RL he had originally planned to pay for the June 13th screening, which the museum said cost at least $12,500, himself. But the bill did not materialize, and already in D.C. I was told it had been taken care of. The bill never materialized, and it's been taken care of anyway. It actually kind of reminds me of the way Tom DeLay used to run things. And, what was the other guy? The lobbyist who was always causing such difficulty with it. Why am I blanking on the name of the lobbyist now? You all know, you're probably all sitting there shouting it at your radios and computers and various other portable devices on which you might be listening. Why can't I bring the Abramoff? There we are, Jack Abramoff. Got it. Okay. But he used to do the same sort of thing where, interestingly, the bills that he was supposed to render to various politicians for rental, say, of his premium seat boxes at the Verizon Center for various events, etc., catering in those boxes for fundraisers that they held there. You just never got billed for it. And then when you asked about it, if you were trying to be honest about things, oh, don't worry, it's been taken care of, which is, of course, all campaign finance violation. But anyway, now this is happening, and I'm sure that, Andrei Nekrasov probably has no idea how it's really supposed to work, either in the United States or in Russia, for that matter. Anyway, Akhmetshin, meanwhile, told Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, in an email on June 29th that he didn't pay for the event, but rather that Potomac Square Group, a Washington public relations company that in the past had circulated news articles critical of Browder to reporters, did pay for it. The Potomac Square Group was working on my instructions to pay for the event, and I understand that my client, Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation, will reimburse PSG, Potomac Square Group, for the expense, Akhmetshin said. So even there, he's not really playing it straight. Who paid for the event? I don't know. But actually, I'll tell you later on in an email that Potomac Square Group paid for it. But they paid for it in the sense that I was going to pay Potomac Square Group. So the answer is, who paid for it is the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation, whoever that is. That's, of course, Veselnitskaya's foundation that I guess at some point you have to trace their funds back probably to the Russian government, but you can never tell, because if it came out of the pocket of an oligarch, it's just the same thing as coming out of the pocket of the Russian government in many instances, but it just adds that additional layer of complication and doubt. Chris Cooper, one of Potomac Square Group's principals, confirmed his company had been compensated by the foundation, so they were used as a pass-through. Probably not a wise move. They probably didn't think it would come to much, and probably have spent the last year thinking they got away with that one. Akhmetshin said the foundation had no connection to Nekrasov, has given Nekrasov no money, and that no funding or direction for the foundation comes from the Russian government at any level or its officials. That would trigger reporting requirements under federal lobbying laws, but of course they could be breaking those. After all, these are criminal enterprises in many cases, these funders who say they have no connection to the Russian government but actually constitute the Russian government. Why would they comply with American campaign finance law? One, they're criminals, and two, they're Russians. Even as law-abiding Russians, they might not want to declare their actual operations to the American government. Akhmetshin also stated the foundation's goal to resume Russian adoptions by American parents can be best obtained by Congress revisiting the Magnitsky Act, and in particular its name. So in other words, once again, we'll let you start adopting Russian children again as long as you get rid of the name of the Magnitsky Act. Even if you don't get rid of its substance, just change the name, which seems to suggest, I don't know what. I mean, I can't imagine why the name of the bill has anything to do with whether or not American parents are fit custodians for Russian-born children offered up in adoptions. It's a little weird. That's an issue not reflected anywhere in the lobbying disclosure records, by the way. In the meantime, revisiting or even watering down the Magnitsky Act would directly benefit another client of Akhmetshin's, who is also not listed on these or any other lobbying forms, Previzon. Previzon and the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation overlap in another way. In an email sent in April to a Warsaw-based NGO. Warsaw. Poland enters into it again. A Polish Warsaw-based NGO that was hosting a speech by Browder. Russian, here she is, Natalia Veselnitskaya. Again, this is an article from a year ago. Natalia Veselnitskaya, when she was still an unknown, identified herself as a lawyer working on behalf of the foundation and sought permission to attend, according to officials with the NGO, called the Open Dialogue Foundation. Veselnitskaya is also a lawyer for Previzon. So let me see if we got all that detail right. Previzon and the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation overlap in this way. Email in April to a Warsaw-based NGO hosting a speech by Browder. So Browder is giving a speech in Warsaw. The Natalia Veselnitskaya writes to who? The NGO in Warsaw, asking for permission to attend Browder's speech. So the Warsaw-based foundation is called the Open Dialogue Foundation. We'll see if we need to remember that at any point. Veselnitskaya, also a lawyer for Prevazon. I think we knew that, but maybe it wasn't fully established. But Prevazon, of course, is kept coming up in Veselnitskaya's context, the context of this meeting. Akhmetshin did not respond to a follow-up email on whether Prevazon was the funding source for the foundation. That's a good question, too. The day after the screening, Nekrasov and his film crew watched in person as a House committee voted to pass the updated Magnitsky legislation, and they met with Rohrabacher. Okay, at the end of the screening of the nearly 2-hour film, organizers planned a discussion moderated by Seymour Hersh. My goodness, he's turning up in some odd places. The renowned U.S. investigative journalist known for blockbuster scoops. The taunts from opposition activists eventually gave way to a brief question and answer session that mainly featured audience members criticizing Nekrasov. Before the screening, boy, all the hammering is really getting closer and closer. I hope this isn't killing you people at home. Before the screening, Hersh explained to Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty that he had seen the film a few months prior at Akhmetshin's behest and was intrigued enough by it that he agreed to host the discussion free of charge. This is the sort of thing that I'm sure would intrigue Seymour Hersh and others like him. And I mean, I'm sure was we can give him the benefit of the doubt. He's looking at things with a critical eye and certainly would be very interested in any plausible explanation for a complicated situation that departed from the official narrative would naturally be interesting to him and worth investigating. Hersh said he knew Akhmetshin through mutual acquaintances. He said he had allowed Akhmetshin to park a couple of antique motorcycles in the driveway of his Washington area home. That's a little uncomfortable. Motorcycles, he said, Akhmetshin had bought thinking they dated from World War II, but in fact were of German manufacture and had been painted over to look like Soviet motorcycles. Gee whiz. Akhmetshin confirmed he had a motorcycle parked at Hersh's house. That seems like innocuous, perhaps, but when you get to the point about they've been painted over to look like Soviet motorcycles, like I wonder whether that's, just another one of those stupid organized crime counterfeiting schemes. They take a junker motorcycle, paint it over to look like it's Soviet and sell it to people who are into, the weirdness of Soviet era products of any kind, I guess. How odd. And what an odd relationship to have with Seymour Hersh, of all people. Okay, at the conclusion of the June 13th event, as the discussion turned loud and rowdy, Hersh tried to get in a final word. "This is the new truth," he said. That is a bit of an ominous ending for this piece. And Hersh has been spectacularly proven right in the past and spectacularly proven wrong in the past as well. So coin toss on this one, and it just adds an extra layer of interest for those of us watching. Let's catch up on some of the other comments that the stories have engendered. Michael Musson having said, "I can't believe Flynn wasn't at the meeting. Did he accidentally set the reminder for PM instead of AM and miss it?" That's a good question. He was certainly involved and was, by that point, heavily involved and well integrated into the campaign. Yeah, I mean, I guess he certainly would have been interested in dirt on Hillary Clinton, too, but I don't know whether... that'd be an interesting question. And the answer would be interesting, too. It would tell us a lot, I think, about the nature of the promise of the meeting. If the promise was of dirt on Hillary Clinton, Flynn would certainly be interested, but I don't know if he'd be professionally interested. To the extent, I wonder if Flynn were there, does Flynn's presence there argue that the campaign did think that there was a international or foreign relations angle to the meeting after all. In other words, would you invite Flynn if you thought the meeting was really going to be about sanctions? I mean, it doesn't help clear them in any way, because Flynn's biggest problem as national security advisor was that he was under enormous pressure financially from the Russians to help get those sanctions lifted. So if they really believed that the discussion was about sanctions, or even if they really believed it was about the adoption angle on sanctions, inviting Flynn at least argues that the Trump camp thought that there was some policy issue here to be discussed at some point. But if it was purely about dirt on Hillary Clinton, I don't know why you would have Flynn there. On the other hand, if the dirt about Hillary Clinton was related to matters of international relations or national security, then I suppose you'd want Flynn to be there too. I don't know what it would tell us if he was really there, but I'd be willing to try and tease it out. That's for sure. Let's see. Karen D says, I have to wonder if Akhmetshin is registered as a foreign agent, and for whom during this meeting with Trump Jr. I don't know who he was registered on behalf of at the time. That seems to be something pretty fluid, but it sounds like he had been registered for some time. It's just, I guess one of the questions that seemed to come out of that Radio Free Europe piece was really, though he was registered, it was very difficult to tell what he had been actually doing with his time. He had complied with the registration part, but he didn't seem to be always in compliance with keeping it current about who he was working for and what the sources of the funds were. And a lot of his filings appeared to be incomplete in nature as well. Interesting. Okay, let's see. Is this changes of directions here, or are these comments from Kate Sherrill here? We have her forwarding a Brad Jaffe tweet, always a good source for a morning story. DHS to turn over Mar-a-Lago visitor logs to Crew, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which will publish them. Public deserves to know who is coming to meet with the president. Absolutely true. I'm glad to see that is finally going to be published. What else have you forwarded to us here, Kate? Phil Mattingly's tweet that says the White House talking point. Oh, a White House talking to potential primary candidate for a sitting senator. As Politico Alex reports, is really something. Oh, let's take a look at that story. What's that all about? White House squeezes Jeff Flake. Yes, we know that for whatever reason, Donald Trump really has a bug up his bottom, let's say, about Jeff Flake, because Flake has not been a reliable Trump supporter, but he is running for re-election to the United States Senate as a Republican, and the White House willing to intervene in a primary in order to get rid of him. The Arizona senator's potential GOP primary foes have been in talks with the president and top administration officials. That is a little unusual. Alex Eisenstadt is the writer on this piece. Let's just dive into this one for a second, even though it's a bit of a change of direction. Maybe that's a good thing. The White House has met with at least 3 actual or prospective primary challengers to Arizona Senator Jeff Flake in recent weeks. A reflection of Donald Trump's strained relations with the senator and the latest sign of the president's willingness to play hardball with lawmakers who cross him, even Republican incumbents. Flake, a longtime Trump critic who refused to endorse the president during the 2016 campaign, is one of a handful of undecided Republican votes on the Obamacare repeal effort. Also a good tie-in. Thank you very much, Kate. He's also one of the most vulnerable Republicans up for re-election in 2018. By the way, I guess at this point we'll acknowledge, I have heard the story and hinted at it in the Morning Post. John McCain, of course, undergoing emergency surgical procedure for, a blood clot detected in his eye. Irony, of course, being that on needing emergency surgery and medical treatment, not a concern at this point for a United States senator, but it does delay his ability to return to Washington, D.C. to vote to take away everyone else's health care, should they ever discover blood clots in their eyes and require emergency surgery. You'll all have to risk it, but John McCain is getting taken care of. But, for whatever reason, I understand from Sponson, our good friend on Twitter and listener to the radio program as well, always a good tipster. He's been reading what I guess is at least confusing, if just not outright bad, journalism about what the delay entails and how it affects the CBO's ability to publish their scoring of the treason care bill and the various options being considered as amendments to the bill. But I guess my guess is that people have become confused in the on the journalist side about exactly what's going on here. Apparently, Sponson has been telling me he's been seeing reporting that suggests that John McCain's illness is somehow impinging upon the CBO's ability to do their scoring work, and I don't believe that that's actually the case, unless he has something that was supposed to have been prepared for CBO scoring that he plans to offer as an alternative. That's, I guess, a possibility we hadn't considered yet. But I think what was going on here was that journalists were just sort of either conflating the issues or doing the writing in ways that made it easier for others who were reading their writing to conflate the issues. I think all that's happening here is they need every vote they can get. McCain won't be ready to return to Washington to cast votes this week, I guess, is the story, but he will be back the week following, and so they will be postponing the voting until he returns. And because of the postponement of the voting, the CBO has the opportunity to finish their analysis and get their scoring done before the voting actually happens, but that gives them an extra week. So it may be an extra week until the CBO announces the results of their work, but not because John McCain has fallen ill, but rather because his falling ill and the postponement of the vote has given them the opportunity to say, okay, well, we'll withhold judgment for another week so that we can do a more thorough analysis and take advantage of the time that his illness is affording us to do a better job or a more complete job. That's the only possibility I can think of, absent perhaps McCain's offering of some substantive amendment that itself needs scoring and that isn't complete, had been scheduled to be completed and for submission to the CBO this week, but has to be pushed off until next week because of his absence. That's possible, but I haven't seen that reported. If you have, please let me know. Okay, so let's dive back in here to the story of Jeff Flake. Flake, longtime critic, of course. Since taking office, Trump has spoken with Arizona State Treasurer Jeff DeWitt, a top official, on his 2016 campaign, on at least two occasions, according to two sources familiar with the talks. More recently, since June, White House officials have also had discussions with former State Senator Kelly Ward, who has announced her bid, and former Arizona GOP Chairman Robert Graham, who, like DeWitt, is exploring a campaign. It's interesting that, though, the president would find himself alienated from both Arizona senators at one time, or dependent on both for their votes. And, I don't know. I mean, McCain's relationship with Flake hasn't, I don't think, been particularly close. I don't know whether McCain would consider himself to have been insulted if Flake were thus insulted. Maybe, but John McCain seems to be, in all instances, a guy who's pretty much out for himself. And I don't know whether he's going to be concerned for Flake in this or not. But ordinarily, this would be an enormous insult and good cause to believe that John McCain would make a problem for the administration and for Mitch McConnell in voting on the upcoming treason care bill, purely out of pique for what they're doing to Jeff Flake. Flake may himself create a problem, but or he may find himself just as easily pressured into doing exactly what the White House wants in the hopes that they'll back off of their support for his primary opponents. It's not a bad bet with any other administration, but it's a particularly bad bet with this one. Really, at this point, anything that'll get you off the ship would be worth considering. I would, at this point, oppose the treason care bill And if it ended your career, so much the better at this point. But honestly, it could set you up for a return to Congress as an opposition hero, or it could give you early retirement, which might be just as much a relief. I see it as a win-win, but I doubt very much that people who who depend on his paycheck see it the same way. Anyway, at a Republican National Committee meeting outside of San Diego in May, David Bossie, Trump's deputy campaign manager and president of the influential conservative outside group Citizens United, and well-known dirty trickster as well, told Graham that either he or DeWitt would likely get substantial backing from conservatives should either enter the contest, according to three people familiar with the conversation. Maybe Flake should get back on the Trump team. A lot of people believe in Trump's policies, said former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, former Maricopa County Sheriff, that is, a prominent immigration hardliner who backed Trump, noting that the president remained popular in Arizona, even if he didn't. There's a silent majority that's still there. They didn't show up for my election, but they're still there, I swear. And still in this state, so watch out, warns Joe Arpaio. Graham, who has begun reviewing polling and purchasing campaign website addresses, was present at a meeting this spring of top Republican donors in Arizona that was also attended by Chris Bannon, White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon's younger brother, and a University of Arizona official. Ought to keep an eye on that one. At the top of the agenda, according to three people familiar with the event, was the prospective Graham primary against Flake. During the meeting, which was also attended by Arizona Cardinals executive Michael Bidwill, several donors expressed mounting frustration with the incumbent. Those familiar with the gathering stressed that Chris Bannon, who's widely viewed as a conduit to his powerful brother, was more of a listener than active participant and did not articulate his feelings about a Flake challenge. Remember the days when Flake was as pure a libertarian as they were likely to get in the modern era out of Arizona? Weird. Anyway, Chris Bannon did not respond to requests for comment. The bad blood between Trump and Flake dates back to the 2016 presidential race when Flake was frequently critical of the president because he's dumb. Can't help that. In the waning days of the campaign, Trump became so angry with the Arizona senator he proposed bankrolling a 2018 primary campaign against him. Backstage before a rally in the state, the president vented that he wanted to find a challenger to run against Flake and that he'd spend $10 million out of his own pocket to defeat him. That's highly unlikely that anything will come out of his pocket. But people sometimes take that seriously as a threat because he's alleged to be rich. Trump is keeping close tabs on Flake's fortunes back home. During a meeting with a small group of state Republican Party chairs in the Oval Office on Tuesday, he asked Arizona Republican Chairman Jonathan Lines, I don't know if it's Lines or Lines, you tell me, for an update on the race. He responded by telling the president that the state party did not get involved in primaries, according to three people familiar with the exchange. That's the correct answer. The mutual dislike runs deep, said Constantine Carrard, a Republican strategist who oversaw Ted Cruz's 2016 campaign in Arizona. That both complicates Flake's path for re-election by putting him at odds with much of the Arizona GOP, and it makes it very likely that if he gets a primary challenger that the Trump team likes, that challenger will be funded and supported in a way that makes beating Flake the most likely outcome. By the way, that way in which he'll be supported, I guess it could now these days include hacking and trolling and fake newsing as well. But if there's $10 million to be had, it will be raised in donations from outside, not come out of Trump's pocket. But he has the ability to raise that kind of money as well. White House spokespersons did not return requests for on-the-record comment about the president's relationship with Flake because it's getting into very dicey territory when he meddles in politics like that using official resources, but it does happen. A Flake spokesman, Joshua Daniels, declined to comment on the senator's conversations with the administration, but noted that he had voted with President Trump over 95% of the time this year and had aggressively backed several White House priorities, including the successful push to confirm Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. White House officials deny they are actively recruiting a challenger or that any decision has been made to target Flake. Within the highest levels of the administration, there is hesitancy to antagonize the senator. It's always a good strategy, I think, whose support is needed as the president struggles to push his ambitious agenda through Congress. There's also some skepticism that Flake, who has spent over 15 years in elected office and hails from a prominent Arizona political family, can be defeated in a primary. It's a big question. Let's see. Is there more to be gleaned from this? Well, likely, but I think we've gotten what we need out of this just for setting the table. We'll check in on this article again, I'm sure, in the near future to see how they're doing in their fundraising efforts. Very interesting. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Kate. Let's see. Other stories, updates, etc. that need to be entered on the record here. Yeah, there are definitely a few here. And some on the previous subject. The New York Times had an entry in the fill-in-the-blanks sweepstakes, as it were, about Rinat Akhmetshin and his background. Many of you have likely seen this one, too. And interesting that they chose to illustrate the story with this, blurry, candid shot. It might have been... Yeah, in fact, it's taken of Akhmetshin at that hearing we mentioned, which is identified here as a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing last summer. It's just the sort of photograph you would have expected to see in old intelligence or counterintelligence files on operatives that federal agents have been following. But this piece here, Soviet veteran who met with Trump Jr. is a master of the dark arts. They're being a little bit more direct. Now, with the passage of a year and more context with which to report on Rinat Akhmetshin, Andrew Higgins and Andrew Kramer, the two Andrews. It's the Andrew Corner here at the New York Times, reporting this piece July 15th. Rinat Akhmetshin, the Russian-American lobbyist who met with Donald Trump Jr. at Trump Tower in June of 2016, had one consistent message. For the journalists who met him over the years at luxury hotels where he stayed in Moscow, London, and Paris, or at his home on a leafy street in Washington, never use email to convey information that needed to be kept secret. What an interesting message to be conveying to journalists at all, in general, and in particular from this guy. While not, he insisted, an expert in the technical aspects of hacking, nor a spy, Mr. Akhmetshin talked openly about how he had worked with a counterintelligence unit while serving with the Red Army after its 1979 invasion of Afghanistan, and how easy it was to find tech-savvy professionals ready and able to plunder just about any email account. That is kind of an odd juxtaposition. I don't think that the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan involved an awful lot of email hacking, but okay. Whatever. A journalist who visited his home was given a thumb drive containing emails that had apparently been stolen by hackers working for one of his clients. On another occasion, I guess he's just in the habit of providing these things. On another occasion, at a meeting with a New York Times reporter at the Ararat Park Hyatt Hotel in Moscow, Mr. Akhmetshin, by then an American citizen, informed the journalist he had recently been reading one of his emails, a note sent by the reporter to a Russian-American defense lawyer who had once worked for Mikhail Khodorkovsky, an anti-Kremlin oligarch. There are some, or at least some who ended up getting cast that way. I suppose if you start out as an anti-Kremlin would-be oligarch, it'd be awfully difficult to make it to oligarch status alive. But you can find yourself on the outs later and then find yourself an anti-Kremlin oligarch. And with enough money, you can sustain that battle for some time before they finally get you. Anyway, in that instance, the reporter's email had become public as part of a lawsuit, but the episode suggests Mr. Akhmetshin's professional focus in the decades since he immigrated to the United States and the experience that he brought to a meeting last June in New York with President Trump's oldest son, Donald Trump Jr., his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and then head of the Trump presidential campaign, Paul Manafort. Interesting. So, a guy who specializes in just mysteriously finding himself with files of the previously private emails of people with whom he has a beef for whatever reason. In that instance, like we said, the reporter's email had become public as part of a lawsuit, but I guess he collects it from all sorts of sources. And it's just his job to make sure that when an email becomes available, publicly or otherwise, he's got it. The meeting was arranged on the claim that a Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, would provide dirt on Hillary Clinton. We know about this meeting, of course. Though in the end, Mr. Trump and his son have insisted that neither Mr. Akhmetshin nor Ms. Veselnitskaya provided anything of value. So by the time this was written, we were on the record with Akhmetshin having, in fact, been one of the other people to attend the meeting. Although, again, now we're up to something like 8 slots to fill in. But Akhmetshin, a gregarious, fast-talking man with a sharp sense of humor, was a skilled practitioner in the muscular Russian version of what in American politics is known as opposition research. From his base in Washington, Mr. Akhmetshin had been hired by an ever-changing roster of clients, often Russians, to burnish their image and blacken those of their rivals. Some clients were close to the Kremlin, others were its bitter foes. Very interesting. And very interesting also that a dual citizen feels so confident in registering as a foreign agent and taking on such a Russia-heavy roster. And yet, of course, insisting on his allegiance to the United States in order to hold on to that dual citizenship. It seems a little suspect, let's say. Mr. Akhmetshin often warned his friends and contacts, nothing is secure. It was a conviction that emerged from the chaotic and often violent corporate battles that convulsed Russia in the 1990s when Kiorny, I'm guessing on the pronunciation, Kiorny PR, or Black Public Relations, based on stolen or fabricated documents, became a powerful weapon for businessmen seeking to damage their rivals without resorting to physical threats, another frequently used tool. But I guess you want to save that one in your back pocket for when it's absolutely necessary. If you can blackmail somebody into getting out of the business that you want to monopolize, so much the better. If not, well, break his legs or throw him out of a building. We'll use that too. I don't know whether Kiorny is the right pronunciation. I guess that's being offered up as the Russian word for, I don't know if it's the color black, but it has the connotation that the English word black sometimes has when you talk about black public relations. The practice was rooted in the Soviet techniques of compromat, which we keep hearing more and more about, the collection of compromising information by the KGB against foes of the Communist Party, but reached its full flowering after the 1991 collapse of communism and the privatization of the dark arts formerly dominated by the KGB. Instead of simply examining old media reports, court records, and other public documents to try to dig up dirt or embarrassing gossip, Russian-style Kiorny PR has often focused on pilfering private information through hacking and physical intrusion into offices and filing cabinets, which I guess you can get away with in a thugocracy. In his own investigation over the years, Mr. Akhmetshin has acquired a reputation for obtaining email records, information from spyware, and other data that appeared to be drawn from Russian hackers. I wonder if Peter Smith ever decided to get in touch with this guy. Before he died mysteriously. He has denied that, insisting that he conducted research for his clients and relayed accurate information to the press. A 2011 case illustrates his style. Andrei Vavilov, I'm guessing on this pronunciation, Vavilov, a former Russian deputy finance minister, and owner of an oil company, right? Okay, so your typical oligarch type profile so far. Vavilov, former deputy finance minister, owner of an oil company, hired him to discredit a longtime adversary, a Russian lawmaker, former Russian lawmaker, There he is, named Ashot Egyazar. How are we going to pronounce this? I'm going to try one more time. Egyazarian. Egyazarian. Anyway, yes, the man whose name I had such difficulty with in the Radio Free Europe piece. Okay, so now we know who the client was on that smear job. Andrei Vavilov, a former Russian deputy finance minister and owner of an oil company. Mr. Vavilov had learned that Mr. Egyazarian was seeking political asylum in the United States and was disgusted by this, Mr. Akhmetshin later said in a court deposition. Why? I don't know. We'll see if we can get any kind of an answer. But we just have to take for granted that he was disgusted by the fact that this other guy was seeking political asylum in the United States. What does he care? I don't know. At the time, Mr. Akhmetshin was described as the Washington director of a pro-democracy think tank called the International Eurasian Institute, although United States corporation records show it had been dissolved 2 years earlier for failure to pay taxes. Remember, of course, that Mr. Akhmetshin's big claim to innocence in all this was he was a Russian-American citizen, a dual citizen, loyal to the United States, who works hard and pays his taxes. But apparently he doesn't pay his taxes, and he may still work hard. We don't know about that part. Anyway, he was lobbying, it says here, against the Magnitsky Act. We know about that. A law, of course, which bars Russian officials suspected of human rights abuses from entering the United States. In a defamation lawsuit later brought by Mr. Egyazarian in a New York federal court, Mr. Akhmetshin testified that Mr. Vavilov invited him to his home in Moscow to discuss how to derail his enemy's asylum application. He had some cash around the house, Mr. Akhmetshin testified. I remember there was money in like $100 bills bags. That's what it says. $100 bills bags. I guess are we talking about like those old-fashioned bags that have dollar signs on them when you used to rob? Well, back in the day when you and I used to rob banks and wearing those crazy burglar masks that cover just your eyes as though that were somehow supposed to disguise your identity. I don't know why we ever thought that was the case. And we used to make off with those $100 bills in bags marked with dollar signs. Anyway, he had some of those bags around, Mr. Vavilov did. Akhmetshin said Mr. Vavilov, who had been dogged for years in Russia by accusations of corruption, handed him a total of $70,000 to $80,000 in cash. That is also interesting how you don't get that number right. Like, how much cash have I been given? Oh, I don't know. I stopped counting at 70,000. I don't imagine it went past 80,000. But once you get to $70,000 in cash, who cares how much you've got? It's not 100,000. So, I don't want to know. That's what kind of, okay, fine. Handed him $70,000 to $80,000 in cash. Did he give him American cash or maybe he gave him rubles? And so the value was somewhere between 70 and 80,000 because that fluctuates. I don't know. The whole thing is a little bit weird. He said it sounded like he had American cash there, which is a weird thing to have in a Russian house in the amounts of like $70,000 to $80,000 anyway. That was the start of a concerted campaign to portray Mr. Egyazarian as an anti-Semite in the news media and to Jewish organizations that then opposed his asylum application. I met with people in Russia. I met with people in Washington, D.C. Mr. Akhmetshin testified Mr. Egyazarian remains in the United States, but his lawyer would not comment on his asylum status. That is interesting. I don't know whether Jewish organizations had other reason to oppose his asylum status prior to this, or whether it was simply, hey, Jewish organizations, did you know that there's a guy seeking asylum in the United States who's an anti-Semite? You should oppose that. I mean, and I guess it's possible that it may very well be true, or it may just be possible that Jewish organizations could be brought to care about that. Like, ordinarily, I don't know whether they would care about something like that unless you pointed it out to them. But then I guess it would be easy to convince me, for instance, well, what if you told me he was one of the heads of the criminal motorcycle gangs? That would be easy to believe that he was an anti-Semite. Or if, for instance, you had told me, no, he's just a regular everyday Russian. They're pretty easy to view as having are being susceptible to anti-Semitism as well. It's kind of had a strong foundation and tradition in Russia, as it has elsewhere in Europe. It's not hard to find anti-Semites. I don't know whether there was any other particular reason to believe that that was the case other than them saying that about him, but it's hard to know. There's no evidence, this goes on to say, that Mr. Akhmetshin's efforts on behalf of any of his clients, whether they had close or hostile relations with the Kremlin, were illegal, nor is there evidence that he personally engaged in the technical aspects of hacking himself. But a 2015 lawsuit filed in New York state courts, I think we heard about this one, put forward detailed allegations. An international mining company, remember this one? This is the potash people, I guess, controlled by a trio of flamboyant millionaires. We didn't learn about this. Flamboyant millionaires from Kazakhstan sued in New York state court, accusing Mr. Akhmetshin of orchestrating a hacking campaign against their company to benefit a rival Russian tycoon, Andrei Melnichenko. That does sound sort of familiar, but I can't put my finger on it. But maybe it just sounds familiar or a little bit like another surname we've been hearing more about. Each side in the dispute is known for aggressive business practices and lavish excesses. That sounds pretty typically oligarchic, Russian oligarchic there. Court papers filed in November of 2015 on behalf of the Kazakhs company, International Mineral Resources, or IMR, described Mr. Akhmetshin as a former Soviet military counterintelligence officer who moved to Washington, D.C. to become a lobbyist and developed a special expertise in running negative campaigns, negative public relations campaigns. I think I made the same mistake in reading last time. Mr. Akhmetshin has called this characterization misleading. He was, he said, drafted as a young man to serve in a military unit performing counterintelligence functions during the Soviet-Afghan War. As an enlisted man, he said, he never received any training in negative public relations. The suit alleged that Mr. Akhmetshin was retained by Eurochem Volga-Kali. No chance I'm pronouncing that one correctly. A Russian potassium mining company controlled by Mr. Melnichenko, which was involved in a $1 billion litigation with IMR. The suit also names as the defendants Salisbury and Ryan, a New York law firm representing Eurochem. The lawsuit alleged that Mr. Akhmetshin was hired to hack into the computer systems of IMR and had stolen about 28,000 files, or about 50 gigabytes of data. It said the sensitive material was then distributed to journalists and others in an effort to harm the company's reputation. The suit claims that Mr. Akhmetshin stole passport information, emails, and personal contact lists for executives within IMR, along with bank account information, loan agreements, business strategy documents, board meeting minutes, drafts of market-sensitive documents, and financial forecasts and projections for the company. An investigator for IMR reported personally witnessing and overhearing a conversation at a London coffee shop. How does that happen? During which Mr. Akhmetshin handed someone an external hard drive that Mr. Akhmetshin described as containing files obtained from IMR computers, according to the lawsuit. How do you overhear this? Everybody's spying on everybody. Amazing. The lawsuit was withdrawn in 2016, and Mr. Melnichenko denied all the allegations in it. Mr. Akhmetshin has denied that he hacked the company's computers. That could be true. He could have hired someone else to do it. An early client of Mr. Akhmetshin's was an opposition leader from Kazakhstan who, from self-imposed exile in the West, was waging a lonely campaign against one of Mr. Putin's closest allies, the president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev. And in neighboring Kyrgyzstan, he helped to unravel a brazen corruption scheme by a former pro-Kremlin leader and his family that had been cheating the population, poor already, out of millions of dollars. What a familiar story. On other occasions, however, Mr. Akhmetshin worked on causes that clearly benefited the Kremlin, like a long-running campaign by Ms. Veselnitskaya to get Congress to repeal legislation imposing sanctions on Russian officials. We all know about which one that one was. Mr. Akhmetshin also at times has been in touch with Russian government officials, court records show. What an American he is. I mean, Americans are, of course, free to make such contacts, as he is, but it does raise another it raises the level of suspicion when you are a former Soviet Army counterintelligence operative who moves to the United States to become a lobbyist, for one thing. That's kind of an odd way of stating your life goals, but I guess if you found out how much money they made, you'd want to do it too. But, you'd think that the optics of taking this Russian clientele on would be bad. But then again, I suppose that's his special niche. They, to the extent that they would need legitimate representation, they would want someone who has at least the language skills to be able to deal with them properly. So I guess you can't freeze him out of the occupation. But you'd think, as a dual citizen involved in American governmental affairs, he would have more concern about the optics of his client list. But apparently not. And that may just be because if I had to retire tomorrow, I'd be taken care of. Everything's okay. My bread is buttered. It doesn't matter to me at this point. So what else have we got here? In 2010, Akhmetshin submitted an op-ed column to the Washington Times on behalf of Viktor Ivanov, then the director of Russia's anti-narcotics police, according to one of Mr. Akhmetshin's own emails, subpoenaed as evidence in a case in the Southern District of New York. Mr. Ivanov is a longtime veteran of Russia's security services. Mr. Akhmetshin has spoken openly about his service in the Soviet military in Afghanistan and his current work throughout Russia and Central Asia. Once, a reporter arrived for a meeting at a coffee shop in Moscow with Mr. Akhmetshin and peered around the room trying to see where he was sitting. Mr. Akhmetshin had come in with what amounted to a disguise. He sat smiling at a table wearing a hat resembling a skull cap and a beard grown to an impressive length. He was headed next, he said, on an assignment to Afghanistan and had assumed the appearance of an Afghan elder. Another weird and awkward ending to another weird and awkward article. That's very strange. I don't know whether I'm supposed to believe that raises even further questions or he's just a weirdo or what. But, disguises so that he can move in and out of the world of Afghanistan tribal elders as well. Sounds like kind of a dangerous guy, but it's difficult to tell how much of it is exaggeration. All right, that's where we are. I think we know all we need to know about Akhmetshin, and we got to figure out exactly who else was in that meeting. And I imagine the bulk of this week will be dedicated to that because of the push off of the vote on treason care. We'll have to catch up on Wednesday with Joan McCarter about that one, having Greg's absence to deal with this week. Let's see. Yes, Rebecca Roman's commenting on the mask issue. Why did the Lone Ranger think that his little mask would shield his identity? I don't know. Is this a riddle? Is that why did the Lone Ranger think that his little mask would shield his identity? I don't know. To get to the other side? Is that the sort of, it sounds like a joke setup, but I don't know. But he was a fictional character, and I guess those robbers presumably were fictional characters too. I don't know that there was ever any rash of robberies that took place, historically speaking, wherein the suspect, in fact, wore a mask like that. But I would like to know, I'm sure there's been a literary study of it at some point. Someone can tell us where that idea came from. Zorro had such a mask, and that was apparently baffling to the Mexican authorities as well. The Hamburglar happens to have gotten away with particularly egregious protein-based larceny with the same methodology. I think we're giving this too much thought, but definitely there's a lot to it. And parody superhero types throughout, I think, the early 20th century. I don't know. I guess back in those days, people were just that much easier to fool. Fake mustaches worked pretty well, too, and especially if they were attached to large noses and glasses. I'm not sure why that worked as a disguise either. But then again, I don't know why they printed dollar signs on the outside of those bags either. Wouldn't you want to be able to carry that stuff around a little more surreptitiously than just that? But as a literary device, it makes a great deal of sense. Okay. Let's see. One more entry in the Donald Trump Jr. meeting sweepstakes, I think, that we might be able to squeeze in. CNN finally sort of weighing in on the game in a way that made it worth including. They seem to be going, betting more heavily on the nefarious angle, despite what Jay Sekulow had to say. How the Trump Jr. meeting fits into the larger Putin game plan. I'm going to have to kill some auto-playing video here, but that's the least of our distractions at this point. Thank you for hanging in there with me during our renovation day. Absolutely, there we go. There's that. There's no way to kill the auto-playing video on this. Hit stop, I hit pause. Hit cancel, I hit the X, everything. I think CNN, we've discussed this before, I think they have their auto-playing video rigged up so that you have to hit cancel on it at least twice before they'll acknowledge that you don't want to hear their crap. But if you didn't want to hear their crap, why were you clicking on their webpage in the first place? Anyway, how does the Trump Jr. meeting fit into the larger Putin game plan, according to Ryan Goodman and Rolf Moat Larsen at CNN? Let's see if we can have a look at that. Oh, by the way, an editor's note on who the writers are. Ryan Goodman is a professor of law at New York University, co-editor-in-chief of Just Security, where we've landed a couple times in the last few weeks. Let's see. Rolf Moat Larsen is the director of the Intelligence and Defense Project at Harvard's Belfer Center. He served as director of intelligence and counterintelligence at the Department of Energy in 2005 to 2008 and as chief of the CIA's European division before that as part of a 23-year career in the CIA. Wow. Well, okay. That's a pretty experienced hand. What do they have to say? Many in the media have focused too narrowly on how Donald Trump Jr.'s June 2016 meeting with a Russian lobbyist and lawyer in Trump Tower looks bad. But what the media and public investigators should really focus on now is what happened after the meeting. True. Let's find out what. The key is to think more broadly, including asking two questions. You could probably ask more, but these are the two that they see as key. First, assuming this was an overture by Russian intelligence agencies, despite the Kremlin's denials, what would the Russian government most likely have done next? Second, how should we then interpret subsequent actions of the Trump circle in light of the actions the Kremlin would have pursued? The answer to these questions suggests that the alleged collusion between the Trump circle and Putin team could well have continued far beyond June 9th. I think that's what everybody's alleging. Okay. Instead, the media coverage seems geared toward making the meeting explicable in terms of an ill-advised, short, or perhaps even forgettable meeting for which Donald Trump Jr. takes the heat. Well, that's the Trump plan for it. I don't know that I would agree that the media is buying into that, but it's certainly the easiest one to attack. But I don't know that that means that that's where they'll limit things. Okay, that narrative often also includes the idea that this may have been an independent, ill-conceived attempt on the part of a Russian lobbying group to provide what was ultimately fairly useless information about Hillary Clinton. We have focused on how the meeting bears all the hallmarks of a Russian intelligence operation, and in particular, a test to gauge whether the Trump campaign would be open to assistance from the Russian government. Although last week we were speculating and reading the Goldstone emails that it seemed clear that all of the recipients in the email were aware of an already ongoing effort, or at least were so incurious about the mention of it that they had nothing to say about it in their email chain, or at least that of part of the email chain which has been revealed to this point. So, okay. If that were the case, Moscow got a green light. The only problem with the Russian attempt, according to Trump Jr. and the Russian lawyer, was that the quality of the information on Clinton was poor. Trump Jr. and his team apparently wanted more. So why would the Kremlin provide nothing of value to Trump principals and disappoint them, especially when we know that by May, according to a U.S. intelligence report, Putin had in his possession what he needed from the DNC servers? The logical explanation is because their intention was to establish interest in the Trump campaign's receiving compromising material, not satisfying their appetite for it. The information that was reportedly passed at this meeting has the feel of representing intelligence feed material to establish interest in more, higher quality information in the future. Coincidentally, perhaps, it was only after the meeting that the DNC emails began to leak as a part of a large-scale influence operation affecting the presidential election. Putin would need to keep a close eye on Donald Trump himself to see if his mercurial and contradictory positions on various issues during the campaign were ever reflected in his approach to Russia. Presumably, it would also be in the Russian interest to seek a direct signal from Trump himself that he was on board with the operation. The Trump team's actions in the days following that fateful meeting are incriminating and bear a stunning consistency with what is reported in the Christopher Steele dossier. Always interesting. Rather than notify authorities about the Russian overture, they kept it mum and denied any Russian contacts when asked. In early July, according to Politico, Carter Page was dispatched to Moscow. Oh, yes, that's right. Almost immediately following that meeting. How interesting. The Trump team would have had to know, at the very least, that Page would be approached by Russian intelligence agents. They might not be that smart. The campaign and Page long refused to say whether he was authorized to travel to Moscow until the news media discovered that the campaign did indeed authorize that trip. During the summer months, American intelligence, reported by the New York Times, began picking up conversations in which Russian officials were discussing contacts with Trump associates, and European allies were starting to pass along information that described meetings in European cities between Russian officials and others close to Russia's President Vladimir Putin and associates of President-elect Trump. Trump has denied that his campaign had any contact with Russian officials. The Washington Post reports that Michael Flynn's undisclosed communications with the Russian ambassador involved a series of contacts that began before the election. In late July, within a few days of officially securing the nomination at the Republican convention, candidate Trump openly invited Russian assistance and election interference. And in December, Jared Kushner, in an undisclosed short meeting with the Russian ambassador, proposed establishing a channel of communications with Moscow inside a Russian embassy or consul. Was this just another ill-advised idea of a neophyte? The former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and a Russia hand, Flynn, was the other member of the Trump transition team who actively participated in the meeting. Is that right? Did we already establish that? Or was this are they talking about the December meeting? Oh, wow, now I'm really confused about that. Okay. He knew better, just as Paul Manafort did during the June 9th meeting. Okay, that clears it up. The list goes on. There's much more here. The list does go on. Actually, not all that much more to this particular article, but we do have to wind things up. Interesting, though, and a great explanation as to why they wouldn't simply dump all the best material right then and there, although another good reason would be, why would you dump all the best material to the idiot son of the idiot running for president on the Republican ticket at that point? You'd certainly need you'd want to identify somebody who would be smart enough to handle this stuff. There just might not have been anyone around. Anyway, very interesting. Hope you didn't have too much trouble bearing with us through the construction today. We'll hand things over now for a better roundup of the day's news to the guys on the after show, who I think probably have no construction going on at their place. What are they covering? A break-in and threatening note is reported at the office of Trump Care bill opponent Nevada Republican Senator Dean Heller. South Carolina's voter registration system was hit by 150,000 hack attempts on Election Day alone. Wow. And in an attempt to directly compete against Vladimir Putin, Rupert Murdoch is about to gain the power to deliver targeted propaganda to millions of customers. Seems like a coveted power he's been after for some time. We'll see how that develops after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thank you for listening, and do stay tuned, because on the last half they're reporting that at a mere 3 sentences long, the treason clause of the Constitution is the most complex laws, one of the most complex laws in Western jurisprudence. And a new study finds media coverage of female athletes is getting more sexist and more racist. What a collection of stuff coming up next.